My son's school called his alpha father. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have one small favor to ask. Please subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our new videos. It only takes a moment. It is completely free, and it is one of the best ways to support our channel as we continue bringing you powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories like this one. Your support truly means more than you know. Before we begin, let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world right now. We always enjoy seeing how far these stories reach and learning where everyone is joining us from today. Now let us begin today's story. The smallest mistake can change an entire family's future. Ethan Brooks had always believed that secrets could protect the people he loved, but every quiet morning reminded him that even the gentlest lie became heavier with time. For the past 7 years, he had built a peaceful life with his son, Noah, in the welcoming town of Cedar Grove, Washington. Their modest apartment sat above a cozy neighborhood bakery, and every weekday began exactly the same way. Ethan prepared blueberry pancakes while Noah packed his own lunch with determined independence, always making sure his favorite dinosaur-shaped sandwich cutter was perfectly aligned. After breakfast, they walked 3 blocks to Cedar Grove Elementary, where Noah greeted every teacher by name and never forgot to wave to the crossing guard standing faithfully at the corner. To everyone around them, they looked like an ordinary little family living an ordinary life. Only Ethan knew that every smile he shared with his son carried the quiet weight of a truth he had never found the courage to reveal. Noah had inherited striking silver-blue eyes that often reminded Ethan of someone he had once believed would always remain beside him. Whenever neighbors commented that Noah would surely grow into a remarkable young man because of those unforgettable eyes, Ethan simply smiled politely and changed the subject. Noah had never asked difficult questions about having only one parent because Ethan had always explained that every family was unique and that love mattered far more than appearances. The little boy accepted that answer with the wholehearted trust only children possess. Meanwhile, across the state, Alexander Hayes had become one of the youngest executives leading a respected technology company. Despite his professional success, he quietly carried one regret that no achievement had ever erased. 7 years earlier, his closest friend, Ethan, had disappeared without explanation, leaving behind nothing except unanswered questions and memories that refused to fade. Alexander had eventually stopped searching, not because he stopped caring, but because he believed everyone deserved the freedom to choose their own path. Still, every birthday and every passing autumn reminded him of the friendship he had never truly forgotten. On an otherwise ordinary Tuesday afternoon, Ethan's phone remained on silent while he helped a customer organize a local reading event at the bakery. At Cedar Grove Elementary, Noah accidentally slipped while playing soccer during recess and twisted his ankle. The school nurse quickly examined him and determined that he only needed a parent or guardian to take him home for the afternoon. Following school policy, the front office called the emergency contact listed first in Noah's student file. A receptionist dialed the number without realizing that an outdated administrative record still listed Alexander Hayes as the primary emergency contact. Alexander answered while leaving an afternoon meeting. Assuming there had been a serious emergency, he immediately drove to the school. 20 minutes later, he walked through the front office doors, where the principal thanked him for arriving so quickly. Before anyone had the opportunity to explain the misunderstanding, a small boy sitting quietly with an ice pack on his ankle looked up from his picture book. Noah studied the tall alpha standing in the doorway with innocent curiosity, smiled as though greeting someone strangely familiar, and softly said, "You have the same smile that I always imagined my father would have." Alexander remained standing in the school office for several quiet seconds, surprised by the little boy's unexpected words. Noah smiled with complete innocence, unaware that his simple observation had stirred emotions neither adult fully understood. The school principal glanced between them with mild confusion before apologizing. "Mr. Hayes, I believe we have discovered an administrative mistake. Your name appeared as the primary emergency contact in Noah's student file." Alexander looked toward the paperwork on the desk, and then back at Noah, whose bright silver blue eyes seemed strangely familiar. Instead of feeling annoyed by the misunderstanding, he felt an unexpected sense of responsibility. He walked over and knelt beside the little boy. "I heard you twisted your ankle," he said gently. Noah nodded. The nurse said I will be fine after I rest for a day or two. Alexander smiled warmly. That is good news. Before either of them could continue, the front office telephone rang again. This time the school successfully reached Ethan. The moment he heard that the emergency contact listed in Noah's file had been called instead of him, his heart nearly stopped. He left the bakery immediately and drove toward the school with trembling hands, replaying every decision he had made over the past 7 years. He had carefully protected Noah, built a quiet life, and avoided every possibility of crossing paths with Alexander again. Yet one forgotten document had undone everything in a single afternoon. When Ethan hurried into the school office a few minutes later, he froze in the doorway. Alexander slowly turned around. Their eyes met for the first time in 7 years. Neither of them spoke. The years seemed to disappear, leaving only the unfinished conversation they had never been able to have. The principal, unaware of their history, smiled with relief. Mr. Brooks, everything is all right. Noah only has a minor ankle sprain. We accidentally contacted Mr. Hayes because of an outdated emergency contact record. Ethan forced a polite smile while quietly thanking the principal. He immediately walked over to Noah and gently checked his ankle. Are you feeling better? Noah nodded cheerfully. I told them I was fine. Mr. Alexander stayed with me so I would not be alone. Ethan looked toward Alexander, struggling to hide the mixture of gratitude and anxiety in his expression. Thank you, he said sincerely. Alexander answered with the same calm voice Ethan remembered from years ago. Anyone would have done the same. After the paperwork had been corrected, the principal apologized again for the confusion. Ethan prepared to help Noah leave, but the little boy unexpectedly reached for Alexander's hand. Will you walk with us to the parking lot? He asked hopefully. Ethan hesitated, uncertain whether to refuse, but Alexander simply smiled. Only if your father is comfortable with it. Ethan slowly nodded. The three of them walked together beneath the tall maple trees lining the front of the school. Noah happily talked about his classmates, his favorite science project, and the soccer game he hoped to play after his ankle healed. Alexander listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions that made the little boy laugh with growing confidence. Ethan quietly observed every interaction, unable to ignore how naturally they connected. When they finally reached Ethan's car, Noah smiled at Alexander once more before climbing into the back seat. Just before Ethan closed the door, Noah looked up with innocent curiosity and asked the question that instantly silenced both adults. Daddy, how do you already know Mr. Alexander if you have never told me about him? The question lingered in the cool afternoon air long after Noah climbed into the back seat. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken, searching for an answer simple enough for a 7-year-old, yet honest enough to avoid becoming another secret. Before he could speak, Alexander offered a gentle smile. Your father and I knew each other a long time ago, he said calmly. Noah's eyes brightened with excitement. Were you friends? Ethan looked toward Alexander, grateful for the kindness in his voice. Yes, Ethan answered quietly. We were very close friends. Noah seemed satisfied with that explanation and happily began talking about the book his class had started reading that week. Ethan thanked Alexander once more before driving away, but as he glanced into the rearview mirror, he noticed Noah continuing to wave until Alexander disappeared from sight. The image stayed with Ethan throughout the evening. After dinner, Noah rested on the couch with his ankle elevated while Ethan read aloud from one of his favorite adventure novels. Halfway through the story, Noah interrupted with another innocent question. Do you think Mr. Alexander likes dinosaurs too? Ethan smiled despite himself. He probably does. Noah nodded thoughtfully. He listened to everything I said today. Most grown-ups pretend to listen, but he really listened. Those words carried more weight than Noah realized. Listening had always been one of Alexander's greatest strengths. Even years earlier, when they were both in college, Alexander never hurried conversations. He remembered birthdays, favorite books, and tiny details that everyone else overlooked. As the house grew quiet after Noah fell asleep, Ethan opened an old wooden box hidden in the back of his closet. Inside were photographs from their university years, faded movie tickets, and a friendship bracelet Noah had never seen. Resting beneath them was a sealed envelope that Ethan had written years ago but never mailed. It contained the explanation he had wanted Alexander to receive before fear convinced him to disappear instead. He stared at it for a long time before gently placing it back inside the box. Across town, Alexander sat alone in his apartment overlooking the river, unable to stop thinking about the little boy he had met that afternoon. Something about Noah felt remarkably familiar. It was not only the silver blue eyes or the easy smile. It was the way the child tilted his head while listening, the quiet determination to stand on his own after twisting his ankle, and the effortless warmth that made strangers feel like friends. Alexander found himself remembering Ethan more vividly than he had in years. The next morning, while reviewing paperwork before an executive meeting, he noticed the business card the school principal had given him in case additional corrections were needed for the emergency contact records. Without fully understanding why, he called the school to confirm that Noah was recovering well. The principal happily assured him that the little boy was resting at home and thanked him again for arriving so quickly the previous afternoon. Before ending the call, she casually added one sentence that caught Alexander completely off guard. "It is wonderful that Noah has someone like you. The resemblance between the two of you is remarkable once you notice the smile." Alexander slowly lowered the phone, staring through the office window as those words echoed in his mind. For the first time since seeing Noah, a possibility he had never allowed himself to imagine quietly began taking shape. Alexander spent the rest of the day unable to focus on financial reports or board meetings. The principal's casual remark echoed through his thoughts with surprising persistence. He had never believed in coincidence, yet every memory of Noah seemed to reveal another small similarity. The little boy's quiet confidence, his thoughtful questions, the familiar smile, and even the gentle way he thanked the school nurse reminded Alexander of someone he had once known better than anyone else. Instead of allowing speculation to become assumptions, he reminded himself that resemblance alone proved nothing. Still, the unanswered questions refused to disappear. Meanwhile, Ethan tried to return to his normal routine inside the bakery. Customers arrived throughout the morning for fresh bread and pastries, but every time the entrance bell rang, he instinctively looked toward the door, half expecting Alexander to appear. Noah remained home to rest, happily sitting near the window with coloring books, building blocks, and a stack of library books that Ethan had borrowed the previous weekend. His ankle already seemed much better, and his cheerful personality filled the apartment with the same warmth it always had. During lunch, Noah looked up from his drawing and smiled. "Daddy, do you think Mr. Alexander likes reading stories?" Ethan paused before answering. "I think he probably does." Noah nodded with satisfaction. "He smiled when I talked about my favorite book. Most people smile because they are being nice. He smiled because he really wanted to." "No." Ethan quietly looked away. Noah had noticed something that Ethan himself had admired years earlier. Alexander had always made people feel heard. Later that afternoon, the bakery received a large order for desserts requested by the elementary school for an upcoming family literacy event. Since Ethan regularly volunteered during reading programs, the principal called personally to thank him for accepting the order. Before ending the conversation, she mentioned that several parents had also volunteered to read stories to the children. "Mr. Hayes offered to participate as well," she said warmly. Ethan nearly dropped the pen in his hand. Alexander volunteered. "Yes," the principal replied. "He said yesterday reminded him how important those moments can be for children." After the call ended, Ethan stood silently in the kitchen, wondering whether fate was gently pushing their lives together again despite every effort he had made to keep them apart. That evening, Noah became even more excited after hearing about Family Literacy Day. "Can we go?" he asked eagerly. Ethan smiled. "Of course." Noah grinned before adding another innocent request. "I hope Mr. Alexander comes too." Ethan could only nod. Across town, Alexander visited his parents for dinner, something he rarely managed because of work. While helping his mother organize old family photographs, he discovered a picture taken nearly 8 years earlier during a university graduation celebration. Ethan stood beside him in the photograph, both of them laughing while holding matching coffee cups. Alexander smiled softly as memories returned with remarkable clarity. His mother noticed the photograph and quietly asked, "Have you ever heard from Ethan again?" Alexander gently shook his head. "Not until yesterday." Curious, she listened as he briefly explained the unexpected meeting at the school. When he finished, she looked thoughtfully at the old photograph before saying something that caught him completely off guard. Sometimes life brings people back together because there is still a chapter that was never allowed to finish. Alexander drove home beneath a sky filled with autumn stars, carrying those words with him. At the very same moment, Ethan reopened the forgotten wooden box hidden inside his closet and slowly unfolded the letter he had never mailed, unaware that the answers Alexander had been searching for all these years were already waiting inside its carefully folded pages. The next morning arrived with crisp autumn air and bright sunlight streaming through the bakery windows. Noah's ankle had improved enough for him to return to school, although he still walked a little more carefully than usual. Ethan smiled as he watched his son happily pack a favorite dinosaur book into his backpack for the upcoming Family Literacy Day event. The little boy had talked about almost nothing else since learning that parents and special guests would be reading stories in his classroom. Before leaving for school, Noah looked up with hopeful eyes. "Do you think Mr. Alexander will really come?" Ethan forced a gentle smile. "If he promised your principal, then I believe he will." Noah nodded with complete confidence. "I hope he reads the story about the fox who found his family." Ethan quietly looked away, wondering whether fate had already begun writing a chapter neither of them could stop. Later that afternoon, after finishing deliveries for the school event, Ethan visited the administrative office to confirm that every document connected to Noah's emergency contacts had finally been corrected. Mrs. Harper, the longtime administrative assistant, apologized once again for the earlier mistake. While searching through archived records, she frowned with surprise. "That is strange," she murmured. Ethan looked up. "What is it?" She carefully opened an older paper file that had been scanned years before the district adopted a digital system. Someone submitted a correction request shortly after Noah first enrolled, but this original registration packet was never removed from the archive. Ethan's heart immediately began racing. Mrs. Harper handed him the folder without realizing its importance. Inside were copies of Noah's first enrollment forms, medical information, and an emergency contact page completed years earlier. Ethan slowly turned each page until he reached the final document. His breath caught. The handwriting on the form belonged to him, but one line had never been changed after it was originally completed. Primary emergency contact, Alexander Hayes. Ethan closed his eyes. He suddenly remembered filling out the paperwork during one of the most exhausting weeks of his life. At the time, he had instinctively written the name of the person he had trusted most before realizing he could no longer allow Alexander to remain connected to Noah's records. He had submitted a correction only days later, believing the change had replaced every copy. Instead, one forgotten archive had quietly preserved the truth for 7 years. Mrs. Harper apologized again. "I cannot believe we overlooked this file." Ethan gently shook his head. It was an honest mistake. As he left the office carrying a copy of the archived paperwork, he realized the school had never truly caused this situation. His own forgotten signature had brought Alexander back into their lives. Across town, Alexander received an unexpected phone call from Dr. Rebecca Lawson, the physician who had cared for Ethan years earlier and had recently retired. She explained that she had discovered an old patient file while organizing records before permanently closing her office. "There is something I believe you deserve to know," she said carefully. "It is not something I can discuss over the telephone, but I hope you will meet me tomorrow morning." Alexander agreed without hesitation. As he ended the call, he looked once again at the graduation photograph resting on his desk. At the very same moment, Ethan unfolded the archived emergency contact form and stared at the familiar name written in his own handwriting. For the first time in 7 years, he realized that perhaps destiny had not exposed his secret by accident. Perhaps it had simply decided the truth had waited long enough. Alexander arrived at Dr. Rebecca Lawson's office the following morning with far more questions than answers. The retired physician welcomed him into a quiet consultation room lined with neatly organized books and framed photographs collected over decades of caring for families. Her expression was calm but thoughtful, as though she had carried the weight of an unfinished conversation for many years. After inviting Alexander to sit down, she placed a sealed folder on the table between them. "Before we begin," she said gently, "I want you to understand that everything Ethan did came from fear, not from a lack of trust in the person you were." Alexander remained silent, listening carefully. Dr. Lawson slowly opened the folder and removed several dated documents. Among them were medical records, a copy of Noah's birth certificate, and handwritten notes documenting conversations she had shared with Ethan during the difficult weeks after Noah was born. She carefully explained that Ethan had received alarming information suggesting that someone connected to Alexander's rapidly growing business interests might attempt to use the child to gain influence over future decisions. Although those concerns were never confirmed, Ethan had believed the risk was real. Overwhelmed by responsibility and determined to protect both the child and the man he loved, he chose to disappear before Alexander even knew the full truth. Dr. Lawson lowered her eyes with quiet regret. Looking back, I wish I had encouraged him to trust you instead of supporting his decision to leave. I believed I was respecting his wishes, but silence became a burden that lasted far too long. Alexander listened without interrupting. His first reaction was not anger. It was sadness for the years Ethan had carried such fear completely alone. He gently closed the folder and asked only one question. Is Noah my son? Dr. Lawson met his eyes and answered with complete honesty. Yes. The room fell silent. Alexander slowly leaned back in his chair, allowing the truth to settle into his heart. He thought about the little boy's smile, the way Noah listened with complete attention, and the strange feeling of familiarity from the moment they had met. Suddenly, every unanswered question seemed to find its place. Before Alexander left, Dr. Lawson handed him one final envelope. Ethan wrote this years ago, she explained softly. He never mailed it. He gave it to me because he believed he might never be brave enough to deliver it himself. I promised I would only give it to you if the truth ever found its way home. Later that afternoon, Family Literacy Day filled Cedar Grove Elementary with laughter and excited conversations. Parents, grandparents, and volunteers gathered inside brightly decorated classrooms, while children proudly introduced the special people in their lives. Ethan stood near the back of Noah's classroom, trying to focus on arranging books for the reading session, yet his thoughts remained fixed on everything that had changed during the past few days. Then the classroom door quietly opened. Alexander stepped inside holding the unopened envelope in one hand and the illustrated storybook he had promised to read in the other. Their eyes met across the room. Neither man spoke. Noah looked up from his desk, smiled with unmistakable happiness, and waved enthusiastically for Alexander to join them. As Alexander walked toward the reading chair, he gently slipped the sealed letter into his jacket pocket. He had already decided that before opening words written by fear, he wanted to give Ethan the chance to speak with hope instead. The classroom quickly filled with quiet excitement as Alexander opened the beautifully illustrated storybook and began reading with the calm confidence that immediately captured every child's attention. His voice carried warmth instead of performance, allowing each page to unfold naturally, as though every young listener had become part of the adventure itself. Noah sat in the front row with an unmistakable smile, never taking his eyes off Alexander for even a moment. Ethan remained near the back of the room beside the bookshelves, watching a scene he had imagined countless times but never believed would become reality. As the story reached its hopeful ending, the children applauded enthusiastically. Mrs. Carter, Noah's teacher, thanked Alexander for volunteering before inviting the students to share what they had learned from the story. Noah raised his hand immediately. When Mrs. Carter nodded toward him, he stood confidently and smiled. The fox thought he had to find a perfect family, he said. But he learned that family is the people who choose to stay with you. The classroom became very quiet. Several parents smiled at the little boy's thoughtful answer. Alexander looked at Noah with unmistakable pride, while Ethan felt his eyes fill with emotion. After the reading session ended, families slowly gathered outside on the school playground beneath bright autumn trees. Children laughed together while parents enjoyed coffee and homemade pastries prepared by Ethan's bakery. Noah eagerly introduced Alexander to several classmates as though the alpha had always belonged there. "This is Mr. Alexander," he said proudly. "He reads stories really well." Alexander laughed softly. "That might be the nicest introduction anyone has ever given me." Ethan watched them from a short distance, realizing that Noah's happiness carried no confusion, only simple acceptance. Later, while Noah joined a group of friends building leaf piles near the playground, Alexander quietly approached Ethan. They walked together toward a peaceful garden behind the school, where benches overlooked a small pond surrounded by colorful maple trees. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Alexander removed the unopened envelope from his jacket pocket and gently placed it between them on the bench. Ethan immediately recognized the handwriting. His expression changed with quiet surprise. "Where did you get that?" Alexander answered honestly. "Dr. Lawson gave it to me this morning." Ethan lowered his eyes. "I wrote it years ago." Alexander nodded. "She also told me the truth." Ethan felt the world become completely still. He expected disappointment, questions, perhaps even anger. Instead, Alexander looked at him with the same kindness he had shown from the moment they unexpectedly met again. "Noah is my son," he said softly. Ethan closed his eyes and slowly nodded. "Yes." Another silence followed, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt honest. Alexander gently pushed the unopened envelope back toward Ethan. "I have not read it." Ethan looked up in surprise. "Why not?" Alexander smiled with quiet sincerity. "Because I would rather hear your voice than the words fear asked you to write 7 years ago." Tears slowly gathered in Ethan's eyes. For the first time since leaving without explanation, he felt that someone had chosen understanding before judgment. He drew a deep breath and finally told Alexander everything. He spoke about the frightening rumors, the overwhelming fear, the lonely nights after Noah was born, and the impossible decision that convinced him disappearing was the only way to protect both the alpha he loved and the child they had created together. When he finished, Alexander did not immediately respond. Instead, he stepped closer and gently rested one reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You should never have carried all of that alone," he said quietly. At that very moment, Noah came running across the playground holding a bright red kite his teacher had given every student. Without hesitation, he reached for both of their hands and smiled with complete innocence. "Come fly it with me," he said happily. Neither adult realized that the little boy had already begun bringing their family back together long before either of them found the courage to tell the truth. The bright red kite climbed higher with every gust of autumn wind as Noah laughed with pure excitement across the wide grassy field behind Cedar Grove Elementary. One small hand held Ethan's while the other reached confidently toward Alexander, as though the little boy had already decided there was room in his heart for both of them. Alexander matched Noah's pace without hesitation, smiling every time the kite danced against the clear blue sky. Ethan quietly watched the scene unfold, realizing that the happiest moments often arrived without careful planning. They simply appeared when people finally stopped running from one another. During the following weeks, Alexander never tried to force himself into Noah's life. Instead, he asked permission before every visit, every phone call, and every school activity. Ethan noticed the respect in every decision. Alexander understood that becoming part of Noah's future required patience rather than urgency. Noah, however, needed no time at all. He eagerly looked forward to every Saturday afternoon they spent together building model airplanes, reading adventure stories, or walking through Cedar Grove's small farmers market where local shop owners quickly learned all three of their names. One Saturday morning, Noah proudly entered a community kite festival sponsored by the town library. Each child was encouraged to decorate a kite with words representing what mattered most. While many children wrote words such as courage, kindness, or dreams, Noah carefully printed 3 simple words across his bright red kite: family, trust, home. Ethan felt his throat tighten the moment he saw it. Alexander quietly stood beside him, equally moved by the innocent honesty of a 7-year-old who had unknowingly expressed everything neither adult had been able to say aloud. Later that afternoon, as Noah happily joined several classmates in a kite-flying competition, Ethan and Alexander sat together beneath a large maple tree overlooking the field. Ethan finally admitted the fear he had never fully released. "I keep wondering if Noah will one day blame me for hiding the truth." Alexander looked toward the children running across the open grass before answering. "He will grow up knowing that every decision you made came from love. One day he may ask difficult questions, but I believe he will also understand difficult answers." Ethan quietly nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in his heart. Alexander gently continued, "The only mistake we cannot repair is choosing silence again." Those words settled deeply inside Ethan. For the first time in years, the future no longer looked like something he had to face alone. As evening approached, Noah returned carrying a small blue ribbon awarded for outstanding creativity. He proudly handed it to both adults instead of keeping it for himself. "This belongs to all of us," he declared, "because my kite only flew so high after both of you helped me." Ethan smiled through tears while Alexander accepted the ribbon with quiet gratitude. A few days later, the school principal invited Ethan and Alexander to attend a parent planning meeting for the upcoming winter reading program. Without thinking, she addressed them together as Noah's parents. The room fell completely silent for a brief moment before. Ethan instinctively glanced toward Alexander. Instead of correcting her, Alexander simply smiled warmly and replied, "We will both be there." Walking home afterward beneath the soft glow of streetlights, Ethan realized something extraordinary had happened. Nobody had questioned them. Nobody had judged them. The acceptance he had feared might never exist had quietly appeared through ordinary acts of kindness and understanding. As they reached the bakery, Noah ran ahead to unlock the front door, then turned back with an excited smile. "Come on," he called happily. "Home is waiting for us." Those simple words lingered in the evening air, reminding both men that sometimes the place people spend years searching for is quietly built one honest choice at a time. Winter arrived gently in Cedar Grove, covering rooftops with a light blanket of snow while warm lights glowed through the bakery windows below Ethan's apartment. Nearly 3 months had passed since the unexpected phone call from Noah's school changed all of their lives. What had begun as a simple administrative mistake had slowly become the beginning of a family none of them had believed was still possible. Alexander never tried to erase the years he had missed. Instead, he honored them by showing up every day afterward. He attended school performances, helped Noah with science projects, read bedtime stories whenever work allowed, and never missed Saturday breakfast at the bakery, where Noah proudly insisted on helping make pancakes for all 3 of them. Ethan quietly watched those ordinary moments become the foundation of something extraordinary. One snowy afternoon, Cedar Grove Elementary hosted its annual Winter Family Festival. Parents and children filled the gymnasium with laughter, handmade decorations, and holiday music. Noah had been chosen to read a short essay titled, "What Family Means to Me." Standing confidently before the audience, he unfolded the paper with both hands and smiled toward the 2 people sitting together in the front row. "When I was younger," he began, "I thought a family was just the people who lived in the same house. Now I think family is made of the people who choose to stay, even when life becomes difficult. My daddy taught me how to be kind. My father taught me how to be brave. Together they taught me that love grows when people tell the truth and forgive each other." The gymnasium became completely silent before warm applause filled the room. Ethan quietly wiped away tears while Alexander looked at Noah with unmistakable pride. After the ceremony, the principal invited the 3 of them to place a new family photograph on the school's community wall, celebrating the many different families that made Cedar Grove stronger. As they stood together smiling for the camera, Ethan realized he no longer felt afraid of being seen. Weeks later, Alexander and Ethan completed the legal paperwork allowing Alexander to become Noah's officially recognized parent in every school and medical record. When the final document was signed, Noah carefully looked at the new emergency contact form before laughing happily. "This time nobody will have to call the wrong person," he said with innocent satisfaction. Ethan smiled through tears. "No, they will not." That evening they returned home together and discovered an old wooden box Ethan had nearly forgotten. Inside rested the sealed letter he had written years earlier but never sent. Without opening it, Ethan quietly carried the envelope outside beneath the softly falling snow. Alexander joined him while Noah watched from the warm bakery window above. Ethan smiled gently before placing the unopened letter into a small fire pit behind the building. The paper slowly disappeared into glowing embers, carrying away the fear that had once controlled his life. Alexander reached for Ethan's hand, and this time neither of them hesitated. They walked back inside where Noah waited with 3 mugs of hot chocolate already prepared on the kitchen table. The little boy looked at both adults with the same bright smile that had unknowingly brought them together from the very beginning. Years earlier, Ethan believed protecting the people he loved meant carrying every burden alone. Alexander believed some losses could never be repaired. Noah quietly proved both of them wrong. In the end, the greatest miracle was never the forgotten school record or the hidden truth waiting to be discovered. The greatest miracle was that love remained patient enough to find its way home, proving that a family is not defined by the years it loses, but by the courage to cherish every day it still has together.